Well, greetings to you all once again in the matchless name of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. Uh, it's been indeed a joy to serve you, to minister to you, to teach you from God's word. And lo and behold, now we are at chapter 11. We crossed 10 chapters of Hebrew. Wow, that's a great achievement. And I'm so happy that God has led us thus far. So I'm so happy to speak from chapter 11 since some things I would like to remind you, because it's not simply names and history, but it also mentions about the characteristics of chapter 11. When we were doing chapter 10, the second part, I had also mentioned some of the things which happened, and they were being witnessed, and those witnesses are mentioned in chapter 11. So so let's go through this chapter 11. So now, what is the main concept in chapter 11? Anybody who can say loudly what is all about chapter 11? Is there anybody who can say what is
Faith.
chapter 11 describing about? Beautiful, wonderful. So now faith is defined and illustrated in chapter 11. Simple words. So what the author does is, since faith is such an important element in perseverance, so faith is an important element in perseverance. So this has the prophecy from Habakkuk, by which the Habakkuk prophet, he says, the just shall live by faith. So the writer now, he turns his attention to fully expose of its meaning, the meaning of faith exposed in a bigger form. So let's go through it. So let me read the first verse for you, or if anybody can help me by reading it. Chapter 11, verse 1.
Now, faith in is confidence in what we hope for and assurance about what we do not see.
Great. Now, the author is beginning with a description of what is faith. Faith is being sure of what we hope for and certain of what we do not see it. Now, the author defines faith is not as itself the substance of the things which we hope for, uh, but it is an attitude of mind to the future. So it's not only the things which are happening in the future, or the things we are hoping for in the current time, but it is actually an attitude of our minds towards the future, or the unseen, that is determinatively no determinative for personal conduct in the present. So faith is on one side the substance or confidence. I hope you're writing it down. So let me just repeat it. What is faith? On one side, from the start, faith is being sure of what we hope for and certain of what we do not see, or what we do not see. Now, this is purely the definition of faith mentioned by the author to the author who's writing to the Hebrew. Now, faith on one hand is the substance or confidence or being courageous or being assured of the things which we hope for. It assures one of the reality of the invisible world. So it is assuring us of the things which we have not seen. So what have we not seen? We have not seen the invisible world about the disciples or the apostles who have talked about, about which Jesus spoke of the kingdom. It is about the invisible world, or the superiority of the visible one. There are two things. On one hand, the faith is the things which we hope for, or the confidence or courage or the assurance of the things which we are hoping. So what is faith? Is seeing the unseen, or you are assuring yourself of the reality of the invisible world on one side, and also knowing the superiority or the importance of the things which are visible to us right now. You see, so within the first part itself, on one hand we see two motives. One is to see the reality of the invisible world and to see the importance or the superiority of which we see right now. Now, on the other hand, faith is the substance or confidence or is the evidence. Let me make it more simple. Faith, on the other hand, is the evidence or proof or the conviction of things which we have not seen with our physical eyes. So, thus, the terminology expresses the sense of the Greek word for faith. Now, the Greek word for faith expresses, such a thing, so let me make it more easier. The context in the time of Hebrews, the people over there that time believed that the things which they haven't seen, they make it more important to those things. So the same way, we over here, in this 21st century, we, through faith or by faith, we are having the absolute conviction or having the confidence or making our faith, as a is the as the evidence or a proof of the things which we have not seen with our physical eyes. You see, faith on one hand is the confidence which we assured of what? Of the reality of the invisible world and the importance of the visible. And on the other hand, the faith is the proof of which we have not seen with our physical eyes. So this is the twofold dimension of faith, which is mentioned in Hebrews chapter 11. Now, therefore, this faith is very much fundamental to perseverance. I hope you remember what I said in the start. Faith is an important element in perseverance. So when I say these twofold um, twofold definition or the explanation of faith, we can also conclude that faith is fundamental to perseverance, because perseverance is nothing more than a series of choices for the future and the unseen over against choices for present, and the things which we feel the heavenly or the transcendental, heavenly thing, the things which we have not seen. So making to so in order to see those transcendental things which we are persevering on it, that's called faith. So when we say faith, it's not only one definition which we can see. There are ample of definitions given by, the writer has given his view of faith. Now, when I ask you faith, what is faith in your words, you might give something else. So there are a lot of these are some of the meanings which we can find out to understand the depth of the word faith. So to concise all these things, faith is seeing the things which we have not seen. That is faith. Now, it was just by faith. It was by faith that the ancient, if we read verse 2, if we read verse 2, we can see this is what the ancients were commended for. Now, by faith, the ancient received the divine approval that is mentioned in verse 2. So now when I say they were commended or they gained approval, it is actually literally gained testimony. So approval in the sense of Hebrew chapter 11, it means to gain the testimony, the life of the people, the ancients testimony. Now that we can just see in 11 chapter 11 verse 4 and 39 5 and 39. Now what are these gained testimony? These are the evidence, these testimonies are the evidence of their lives, and God advocating and guaranteeing that they would be declared righteous. Now if we read, you know uh, In each verses, we can see that they were being declared as righteous. You see, Enoch pleased God, and then he was declared righteous. Noah was considered righteous. In every places we can see, and if we don't find it, some scholars, what they say is, in the original text, in the original Hebrew text, they refer these people as the righteous ones. So, in simple words, they gained a testimony. And these testimonies are the evidences of their lives, and God advocating and guaranteeing them, sealing them as righteous people. When are they going to be declared as righteous people? On the day of judgment. You see, now, as the author is about to demonstrate massively, what we are to do is to hold fast to the unseen in spite of the illusions and temptations, which is passing by in this world. Through these things, through these testimonies, we are learning these things. So these are, the testimonies in chapter 11. We see 30 people's lives being described by faith. These people, by faith Abel, by faith Cain, not Cain, by faith Abel, by faith Enoch, by faith Abraham, by faith Moses. Each people, according to the chronological order, we see that they lived their life depending on God by faith. So faith is the ultimate concept of this chapter. Now, you see, it is interesting. It is interesting to note that, in this illustration of his definition of faith, he describes the faith through stories, and these are the 30 stories which the author is mentioning. 30 stories of 30 people lived differently in different time, but lived on one aspect, and that is faith. So what the writer want to say is, it is not, you know in Old Testament that faith stays. It is not in the time of Jesus that faith stays. It is not and in the time of apostles that the faith stays. It is the 21st century too that the faith stays. It is the life ahead of us that the faith stays. You see, it is an unending concept. Because in simple words, we are the people who are expecting God's kingdom to be established. We are expecting something which is at the eternity end, everlasting end, eternity end. There is no end of the kingdom of God. So many people, the church fathers, what they say for end is eternity end. So we are hoping on that eternity end. So our faith has not stopped till 21st century. It will remain on and on and on and on. So by faith, these things begin. So let me just categorize each part in chapter 11. The first category is he describes by chronological order. I hope you understand the word chronological, according to the time zones, according to people's, according to the order of the time. That's what chronological order means. So he roughly describes the illustrations in a chronological fashion. So first of all, he begins with the creation of the world, creation of the universe. So by faith, we understand that the universe was formed. What is seen was not made out of what is visible. So this statement is not intended to teach, creation out of nothing, or creatio ex nihilo, creation out of nothing. It is not intended to teach that creation was made out of nothing. Yes, it was made out of nothing, but that was not the intention to be taught. But what the author is actually, focusing is uh, how to say anything, at all about the character. It is about the character of the prior substance from which, you know the creation was made, the world was made. It is the prior substance, the character, or the importance of the substance from which the world was made. So the writer only points that it is not purely physical explanation of the world as possible. So can you can you describe how the world was created through science? Even from the Bible, we cannot say how God began. It is just mentioning in the beginning. So eternity beginning, eternity end. That's what our Bible teaches us. So we cannot describe out of our, limited conscious mind. Only one thing remains: by faith. So by faith, this faith looks on, to the answer, that which cannot be seen. We have not seen, but we have an answer, and that is by faith. I hope you're getting it. I hope you're understanding it, right? The questions which we cannot answer, it is by faith we establish. But for everything, do not think that by faith only it will work. There are explanations. But these things which we have not seen yet, it is by faith that we can get the answer. And then after the creation, the second category comes. He calls out the Old Testament saints to witness to the meaning of faith. He brings out the saints from the Old Testament to describe more of what is faith. So first in order, what they discuss that God works through the great heroes who lived before the flood. So the second category is the people of the time before Noah, before the flood. So everybody has this question: Abel ने sacrifice किया, Cain ने भी sacrifice किया. They both sacrificed, right? But why was God pleased with, Abel's sacrifice? Everybody has that question. I hope you might also have it. Bible. Let's come back to Genesis. There are some new things to be learned. Genesis chapter 4, verses 4. Can somebody read it out for me?
Abel also bought of the firstborn of his flock and of their fat, and the Lord respected Abel and his offering.
Let me just briefly explain. As Tanvi read, we have seen how Abel's sacrifice was accepted. Now, many of us might think, how could God be so partial that he did not accept Cain's offering? Right? This might be the questions wandering in the mind of people. So let me just make it simple for you. It is that God was pleased with Abel's offering. It is not mentioned that God accepted only Abel's offering. Let me read it out for you once again. But Abel brought fat portions from some of the firstborn of his flock. The Lord looked with favor on Abel and his offering. It is not mentioning simple offering. You see, Abel offered God a better sacrifice than Cain did. Absolutely. The writer does not state in what way it was more acceptable, except to say that it was done in faith. So the writer wants to mention that faith was a factor in the sacrifice of Abel. You see, and he also gives a hint of the possibility of it being a more abundant than Cain's offering. So let us notice that God accepted his offering, let me make it out in inverted commas, God accepted, or God was pleased with his offering. It is not offering, it was his offering. So the offering brought by Abel was a pleasing one, but it does not mean that God rejected Cain's offering. He accepted it, but it says that Abel's offering was more pleasing to God. Why? Faith is the factor. You see, faith is one of the biggest factor, and Cain, it is said to be like, it is said that Cain was having a selfish motive in the sacrifice, but Abel brought his sacrifice with faith. So in simple words, we can conclude Abel's offering was more pleasing to God. I hope you're understanding it, right? Now, the next passage, the next few verses, it is mentioning of how Enoch was pleased. In Enoch's life was pleasing to God. Now, proof for Enoch's faith lies in the fact that he pleased God. Let's go back to Genesis chapter 5, verse 24. I'll read it out for you. Otherwise, I I have to read it after the class. Otherwise, uh, Genesis chapter 5, verses 24. It says, Enoch walked with God, then he was no more, because God took him. You see, uh, Enoch walked with God. That itself shows that God was pleased with the life of Enoch. So it cannot please God without a faith, which clearly sees him. You know, the unseen, or all as a living reality, and as one who can intervene in history to reward those who earnestly seek him. So Enoch walked with God, he pleased God, he earnestly seeked God. That is in verse 6, Hebrews chapter 11, verse 6. That's what it says. No, um, and without faith, it is impossible to please God, because anyone who comes to him must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who earnestly seek him. It is written just right below Enoch's life testimony. So it shows that Enoch not just only walked with God. So according to verse 6, he pleased God with faith, and he came to God, he believed in God, that God exists, and he received the rewards, and he earnestly sought God. That's what Enoch did, according to verse 6. I hope you're getting it. One cannot please God without faith, which clearly sees God, the unseen, a living reality, the one who can intervene in the history of mankind, the one who can reward, the one who can those people, reward those people who earnestly seek him. So the reward for Enoch's faith, now please listen to me how I say it. The reward for Enoch's faith was translated in simple. What was the reward for Enoch's faith? He was taken from this life so that he did not experience death. That was the reward he received. He did not receive death, but he received life, a new life in eternity. That's what a reward of a faith-filled person has. Now, the next thing is the meaning of faith is defined by the writer of Hebrews. The faith is more clearly illustrated from the life of Noah. You see, the chronological order is mentioned. You see, Adam, Eve, then Abel, um, following to Enoch, and then coming to Noah. In each person's name, the seriousness, the intensity of understanding faith is also progressive. It is increasing. The intensity is going higher and higher. It is not, staying in one place. It is not stagnant. So the understanding of faith is going much higher and higher. I hope you're getting it. So first of all, how did we understand faith? Was through Abel's sacrifice. It was pleasing to God. And then next came Enoch. He walked with God. He sought God. He believed in God. He trusted in God. That was faith for each people. Now this intensity of this understanding is increasing more high. So it is illustrated from the life of Noah, of whom it was said that God warned him of the things which have not been seen. God told Noah that there will be a flood. Did Noah see it? Did Noah see that flood? No. But he believed in the things which was not seen. Verse 7 clearly says that. So the response shown by Noah describes that the flood was still in future, but it was unheard. It was certainly unseen, but nevertheless he was convinced of its reality because of the divine oracle given by God. So this conviction determined the conviction, as I told the definition of faith, having that conviction in yourself. So that conviction was there in Noah, and this conviction led him to obey God. This conviction determined his course of action. And no wonder, the Bible says he became the heir of righteousness that comes by faith. Romans chapter 3, verse 22, Romans 4, verse 13, Hebrews chapter 10, verse 38, all these things says that righteousness comes by faith. Noah, in Genesis itself, it is said Noah was the righteous person. Now you see, from the level of understanding of just pleasing to God by Abel, it is increasing, then again increasing the seriousness of so seeking God, trusting in him, believing in him, and now the intensity of understanding is again increasing. It is righteousness. It is righteousness which comes by faith. So the intensity is going high. The importance is going high. Now the next category comes. So the first category was creation. The second category was the people before Noah. Now the third category comes. Who are they? The patriarchs, the forefathers. And it all begins with Abraham in verses 8 to 22. You see, from verse 8 to 22, Abraham is the first and perhaps the greatest Old Testament example of faith. In fact, he is known as the father of faith, right? We believe that sentence, the statement, no wonder he is the father of faith. He is the greatest example in the Old Testament who describes faith. So he proved his faith by prompt response to God's call. First, God called him out of his own land. So Abraham, what did he say? Oh Lord, I am staying here. Please let me stay. This place seems so nice to me. It is good. Please, why are you changing my place and then suddenly taking to somewhere else? What is this, Lord? If I was in his place, I would have definitely asked him. But then Abraham blindly responded to God's call. No, God's call was blindly responded by Abraham. Although it was go to a place with which he was totally unacquainted. He was not at all acquainted with these places which God had promised. And by the fact that he did not make a permanent home. Deuteronomy chapter 6, it says, wandering Arameans. Chalte phirte ghumte Arameans. On one side, I want to be that kind of a guy. Wandering evangelist. That is a good job for me. I love that job. Wandering evangelist. I was, trust me, I'm not lying. I was inspired by the life of Abraham, and I wanted to, I wanted to become like, you know, Abraham, wandering evangelist, going here and there, gospel sunao, niklo, dusre jagah pe jao. That's one of my favorite job. I would love to do that. No house, no permanent place, one bag, one guitar, one simple Bible, and one voice. काफी है. So let's come back. He was unacquainted with this, with the places which was mentioned by God, but blindly responded to God's call by faith. And now he was looking forward to the city with foundations, whose architect was God himself, whose architect and builder, they both were God. Now, in the case of Sarah, after the mention of Abraham, there is Sarah mentioned. I was wondering why Sarah is mentioned. We can see how could she describe faith. How could she be described as a woman of faith? Because there is an instant which we all remember when the angels or the messengers said, "You will give birth to a baby boy, you will give birth to a son." What was the response of this woman? She laughed. It's like in Malayalam we say puchikuga. That was the response. Ignore it. क्या बोल रहा है, जो बोलना है बोलना है, ऐसे बुढ़िया को कैसे बोलते. So that was the response of this woman. But why is Sarah mentioned over here? Let me just briefly explain it. I hope you can see me. Yeah. Now, there is no record of her faith in the Old Testament. Now, but some scholars help us to understand, the Greek meaning of the mention about Sarah. Now, the Greek word translated, conceive seed. There is a particular verse, when Sarah is mentioned. Uh, so sorry. And Sarah herself was barren, was unable to become a father because he considered him faithful who had made the promise. You see, Sarah is mentioned as a passive agent. You see, Sarah is mentioned as a passive agent, not an active person. It is through Abraham by faith. So what I want to say is, the Greek word translated conceive seed. Yes, verses 11, that says, so the Greek word translated conceive seed, it is not only the word for the mother's part in conception. So it describes not only in the, it is exactly in the Greek verb or the translation, it is not the word for the mother's part in conception, but it is the father's part. So it is said that it is the patriarchal system of description. So that way, if we see, I would like to go with the scholars what they say. It is most likely it should be said that it is the father's part in the conception through Sarah. So let's leave this, but she is listed in the people of faith, right? So let's not argue with this. Let's go forward. So one conclusion for this, once again, I would say is, to be translated by faith, Abraham received the power to beget by Sarah herself. So, and then in a good literary fashion, in a good writing fashion, what the author, what he does is he breaks up suddenly the history. He breaks up the survey of redemption history, and he pauses there to summarize what he has been saying from verse 1 to verse 16. He is trying to summarize, because otherwise he will be monotonous in description. So that's the reason he breaks up, and then he says that is a larger fulfillment of God's promise than that which can be realized on earth. It is the larger fulfillment of God's promises, which can be realized on earth in the realm of all the visible. So all these people were still living, according to verse 13. According to verse 13, all these people were still living by faith when they died. So though Abraham did get to Canaan, the promised land, and though Isaac was born to him in his old age, and uh, in the sense of promises of God, his faith not being totally rewarded, it is also true that he did not receive what was promised. So in simple, he did not receive the promise. What was the great promise? Was he was promised of a better country, a heavenly one. You see, he did not get that in the promises which God had promised. So there are twofold interpretation in this kind of verses. So when God is promising Abraham of a country, it is not only of the worldly country which God is describing, it is also about a heavenly country which God has promised Abraham. So that's why it is said all these people, they did not receive anything but were still living by faith even when they died. So uh, it was faith which made the forefathers live as aliens on strangers on earth, because they were looking for a country of their own beyond the space of earth, beyond the time limit of earth. So God is not ashamed to be called their God. Verse 16. Now, he writer arrives at the conclusion from the fact that while residing in the promised land, the patriarchs still called themselves sojourners. What is the Hindi word for sojourners? मतलब कुछ देर के लिए हम यहाँ पे रहते हैं ना, strangers or sojourners in the land. I wish I could get that Hindi word. So pardesiya, yes, that can be a word. Yes. So the
मुसाफिर
people,
परदेसी
the forefathers, Musafir, Pardesiya, thank you. So these word is so beautiful to be explained, and they were not ashamed to call themselves as uh, strangers or pilgrims or sojourners. So faith is the opposite of shrinking back. It is not shrinking back, but it is pressing forward towards the goals which are real, but although not seen. So faith is not about shrinking back, but it is pressing on toward the goal which we have not seen yet. So this is the whole theme of Hebrews, and it is compressed within the limits of one concept, and that one concept is faith. So, and then he returns to the fate of Abraham before going on to mention that of Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph, the supreme test of Abraham's faith. When Isaac was asked to be, Abraham was asked to offer Isaac, it just showed that Isaac, was his offspring. Now, you see, there is a clash between the promise of God to Abraham, and there is a clash between the sacrifice of his own child. You see, there is a clash. The promise of God and the commandment of God, they both were clashing. What was the promise of God? I hope you understand it. What was the promise? That he will receive a child, and that child will be blessed. You will have a great generation. That generation will be blessed. So through his child, the generation should have been blessed. That was the promise of God. But suddenly, an unexpected command from God: sacrifice your child. That was the clash between the promise and commandment. There is a contradictory. There is a contrast, big contrast. But Abraham did not say, Lord, you only promised that you will give me a child. Lord, you only promised that my children will be great as sand on the seashore. They will be like stars. You promised only. Then how can you say that you are asking for my child to be sacrificed? How can you say that? He did not go for an argument, but he reasoned with himself that God could raise the dead. He believed in himself and reasoned that God raised the dead. And not having the fire was not the reason. Jehovah Jireh, God my provider. It became that that title became a hope for Abraham. That title of God became a hope for Abraham. The name of that God, Jehovah Jireh. You see, this thing became a hope, and the faith which he had about the resurrection concept. So Isaac became, in a metaphorical language or in a figurative language, Isaac is seen to be a paradigm of a resurrection of Christ. You see, the promise of God was child bearing and child being grown up and the children's being blessed. In the same way, Jesus, as a child of God the Father, suddenly the command to Abraham coming that Isaac should be sacrificed. The same way Jesus was sacrificed. So, in a sense, in a figurative language, Isaac became, by a way of parable, he became a type of resurrection of Christ. I hope you're understanding it, right? So, then the author moves along. He then runs to Moses. He goes through verses 23 to 28, describing Moses. So what was Moses's role in this faith? अब्राहम का तो दिखाई दिया, perhaps अब्राहम का तो बीच में दिखाई दिया था कि he was the greatest example of faith. अभी उससे भी greatest कहां से आएगा? That will be a question. So suddenly he comes up with Moses with a different angle, with a different perspective. And what is that perspective? That his faith begins with his parents. You see, it is not mentioning about Moses' faith in the first. If we read verse 23, we can see by faith, Moses' parents. So the mention is not about Moses in the start. It is about the faith of the parents of Moses, who by faith, through faith, gained some inkling of their child's destiny. So through faith, they came to know about their child's destiny. That faith compelled Moses to forfeit the immediate for the future. You see, the seen for the unseen. Moses then, by faith, he chose to be ill-treated along with the people of God. Verse 25. He chose to be ill-treated rather than for a momentary pleasures. He was in the king's palace, my dears. He could have enjoyed all the pleasures in the Egypt. He was tempted. He was going through different struggles. You see, rather than enjoying the momentary pleasures, he chose to be ill-treated, which is mentioned in verse 25. He regarded disgrace for the sake of Christ. He regarded these things, disgrace for the sake of Christ, as of greater value than the treasures of Egypt. So the treasures of Egypt was not a factor for Moses. It was the faith in God which motivated him to be ill-treated by the Egyptians. So this interpretation placed upon the NIV means that Moses had faith in God who would fulfill his purpose and his promises. That is the fulfillment which can come only at the coming of Jesus Christ. No wonder Jesus is mentioned as greater than Moses in the previous chapters. You see, why Moses became a paradigm and a big example, and that also to be compared with Jesus Christ. This is the thing. Abraham by faith, he did everything, pleased God. You see, the intensity is increasing. Now, faith is being known by ill treatment, suffering. It is not only by pleasing God, but also by the suffering that we go through. So faith helps us to stand by those things. So he considered the reproach of the Christ to be greater riches, which could mean that he was happy. So in simple words, Moses was happy to suffer those reproaches which belongs to the envoy or the group of God sent to a world, that world which is rebelling against God. So Moses, so in more easy words, Moses suffered as God's Christ in the Old Testament. So in the Old Testament, Moses became, or Moses was considered as a paradigm of Christ in the Old Testament. Moses Egypt से उनको बाहर लेकर आया. Jesus, in the same way in the New Testament, brought people out of the death, brought people out of the sin, and the same way Moses. Now see, comparatively, Moses can also be said as a kind of a Christ in the Old Testament. You see, the intensity is increasing higher and higher. And then finally, he runs through the faith of those from Exodus. You see, from verses 29 to 38. Verses 29 onwards, he goes to 38. You see, एक एक लोगों के बारे में उन्हें बताना था तो ऐसे बता सकता था. But he did not get time. I hope he did not get time to write very well. So what he did is, भगा दिया. एक एक लोगों का नाम short में बता दिया. But that does not mean these people were less important than the people mentioned above. They are equally important in describing faith. I hope you're getting it. And then finally, he comes to the Maccabean times. That is a historical period. Maccabean times, I hope Arpita, Sister Arpita can know this, what is Maccabean times, because she is learning these subjects, the Maccabean revolt, the death. You see, in those times, the people had to suffer death. Some people had to face the lions. And that facing the lion was considered as an entertainment to the Roman Empire. I hope you know what is amphitheater or theater in simple. अभी के टाइम में हम जो थिएटर में सिनेमा देखते हैं, that is entertainment to us. Similarly, killing the people of God by throwing them in front of the lions was an entertainment, and no wonder that place was called amphitheater or theater. Entertainment by killing the people of God. In fact, verses 37 says very extremely, they were stoned and then they were sawed in two. दो टुकड़े में उनको saw कर देते. Like they used to cut bodies. That was the seriousness of the martyrs. And still, at the time of death, they did not give up their faith in God. Now I hope you understand what is the meaning of faith. You see, faith started with the definition beginning from Abel's story. Slowly, faith का definition धीरे धीरे change हुआ. The meaning remains the same, but the expression of that faith changed in form. It's changed by pleasing God, to walking with God, to seeking God, to please God, and then coming to be physical, like being ill-treated for God, and then fighting for God. Throughout the history, faith means the same, but the expression changed. And finally, the expression of that faith was martyrdom. The meaning of faith in expression is martyrdom. But the meaning of faith is seeing the things that we have not seen. The perfect example coming to my mind right now is Stephen. Stephanos, you see, when he was stoned to death, what did Stephen say? I see the heavens open. He saw the things which he could not see in his lifetime. And when he suffered martyrdom, he saw those things which the people also could not see. You see, my friends, faith, having faith is not simply trusting in God, believing in God. You see, there are a lot of expression of faith. Sitting, I'm not blaming, but let me, express my views. Sitting at home and simply saying, I have faith in God does not mean that you are faith. It means that you have faith, but the expression right now in the current world, according to me, that our faith should be expressed to the people even when barriers are there. You see, throughout the histories, people had to suffer. People of God had to suffer ill treatment, problems, struggles, suffering. You see, all these things are there in lives. These things help us to understand what the meaning, or no, it's not just about the meaning, but also how to express our faith. The other part is we see some of the people who were considered as, who were considered so bad that they were in the periphery or the margins. You see, for example, we see the description of the people of Israel, or the other people who were involved, known as Gentiles. We can also see Rahab the harlot. We can also see different kind of people who are in the periphery or in the margins. But these mentioning of people helps us to understand that even the people who are not reputed, the unrecognized people, they are also redeemed by faith in Christ, in God. You see, these lessons, these people helps us to understand that even the disreputable, this disreputable are redeemed by faith in God. So with the time, failing him to write, he goes on towards the times of Judges. He goes on to mention the people and the prophets. He goes on to mention the kings. He goes on to mention the exiles. He goes on finally at the martyrs period. So this whole beautiful passage summarizes the writer's concept of faith. Now, verse 39, these were all commanded, commended. These people, they were all commended uh, for their faith, yet none of them received what had been promised. You see, if the author can say that they received nothing even when having faith in God, can we say that they received everything for what was promised to them? Sometimes we also can experience, Lord, I know अलग अलग promise तो परमेश्वर ने हमारे लिए तो बनाया है, but why am I going through these times? We questions, right? Even including me, we question. It is natural, but it is not we who direct our own paths. It is God who directs our path towards the promise. You see, the biggest promise being made by God ever in the history is promising about a kingdom that is heaven. We are to live a life in the life after death. You see, in heaven. That is the greatest promise from the creation story itself. So all these things we can see, how much greater therefore should be our faith, our loyalty to God, than that of the ancients one. And yet the expression that only together with us that they be made perfect. That's the expression, that we were made perfect and slowly being made people of faith. So chapter 11, you see, shows, implies that the men of faith in the Old Testament and those in the Christian era alike belong to one God, one people of God, who are together as a whole being made perfect. So it's not an individual kind of thing. It is as a togetherness, a people, a group, as a nation of God being perfect, being perfected together. So he mentions about faith in the chapter 11. He mentions about being people being made perfect in chapter 11. He mentions about the progressive expression of faith in chapter 11. What are these lessons for? What are these examples made for? Why is he mentioning 30 people or more than that, the people of Israel? Why is he mentioning? The answer is chapter 12, verse 1. And I hope, we'll all be excited for that chapter. Can somebody please read the first verse of chapter 12? I hope you yourself, while reading, you will understand.
Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witness, let us also lay aside every weight and sin which clings so closely, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us.
You see, let's continue to read till verse 3. I will not explain it. That will be explained by our uh, teacher, evangelist Joash. So please read till verse 3.
Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us also lay aside every weight and sin which clings so closely. Let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, looking to Jesus, the founder and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despised despising the shame, and is seated at the right hand of the throne of God. Consider him who endured from sinners such hostility against himself, so that you may not grow weary or faint hearted.
That's the right answer for why chapter 11 was written. Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, so chapter 11 is that great cloud of witnesses, witnesses of 30 people who are significant in the role of faith. You see, since we are surrounded by great cloud of witnesses, rest you can decide. You can read and understand. That's the homework for you, okay? That's the homework for you. Since we are having great cloud of witnesses surrounding us, the rest teaches us all in simple words. And that will be more explained by evangelist Joash in the next week.